Well, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Tess Taylor, and I'm a specialist with the Community Education Department at MDA. We're thrilled to have you join us for today's webinar, Understanding Clinical Trials and Natural History Studies. This learning event is part of our larger MDA community education program, which focuses on bringing the neuromuscular disease community together around education and resources. Be sure to visit the community education section on mda.org for updates on upcoming events. We are recording today's event and we'll be posting it to the website for on-demand viewing at a later date. Everyone registered for today's session will receive that information in their inbox. Please know that all phone lines have been muted, but you can still ask questions. We have a Q&A session at the end of Dr. Phan's presentation today. So if you are logged in live, you can use the chat or Q&A feature in the webinar to type in your questions. And if you asked a question at registration, we encourage you to again ask it if you are live here with us today. MDA would like to thank our program sponsors, Edgewise Therapeutics, Mitsubishi, Tanabe, Pharma America, and Regeneron Pharmaceuticals for partnering with us on today's webinar. For 75 years, MDA has led the way in funding research to accelerate the development of new treatments, expanding access to care and clinical trials through the MDA Care Center network, and advocating for access and inclusion for the neuromuscular disease community. MDA delivers its mission through research, access to care, advocacy, education, recreation, and engagement. Since its inception, MDA has invested more than $1.1 billion in neuromuscular disease research. Our MDA care centers are located at over 150 top medical institutions nationwide, providing care from clinicians who specialize in neuromuscular disease. MDA's advocacy work focuses on support for accelerated approvals and novel research, access to healthcare, accessible air travel, and more. This focus plays a vital role in shaping laws and policies that support the needs of people living with rare neuromuscular diseases. Our community education and recreation programs are designed to connect individuals and families. We are committed to building a nurturing environment where our members can share experiences, triumphs, and challenges. Every year, we offer over 40 educational programs, over 20 summer camps, and dozens of other community activities, both in person and virtually. If you haven't done so already, we invite you to join the MDA community by registering with us. Registration is free. Please see the link in the chat. To learn more about MDA, please visit mda.org. Now it is my pleasure to introduce our speaker, Phan, MD. Dr. Phan is a pediatric neurologist and sleep specialist with years of clinical experience. She is passionate about clinical research, specifically clinical research in rare diseases. Her passion and motivation to improve access to clinical trials for patients with rare diseases led her to establish Rare Disease Research, LLC. Dr. Phan earned her MD at Morehouse School of Medicine and completed her residency at the University of Alabama. Hi, Dr. Phan, and thank you so much for being here today. I am going to stop sharing my screen so that I can turn the time over to you.
Thank you so much, Tess and MDA, for allowing me to have this opportunity to speak on clinical trials and natural histories and what are the differences between the two. So it's my honor to be here today. This is near and dear to my heart. It is something that I do day in and day out at Rare Disease Research Center. Are you able to see my slideshow?
Not yet.
Okay. All right. Let me see. How's that?
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Okay, thanks. So it's an honor to be here today. I'm humbled to be amongst all of the audience because I know that it's composed of patients and their families and other supporting members of the healthcare community for the patients that we serve. So it is an honor for me to be here today and to present on the understanding of clinical trials versus natural history studies. I mentioned earlier, this is near and dear to my heart. It is something that I do full-time at Rare Disease Research and Independent Clinical Research Center. So in today's presentation, what we will be covering is the purpose of a clinical trial in neuromuscular disease, and what is the designs of clinical trials? What does it mean? And comparing that to the role of natural history in advancing treatments options and understanding disease progression. And what I'll also highlight are some key considerations for participants in clinical trials, including what are eligibility, what are risk and benefits, and then there'll be a short touch on the tools to find and evaluate clinical trials opportunities. And there will be a short Q&A. But if there isn't, at the end of this presentation, I do have my contact information, my email. So feel free to reach out to me after this presentation if I have not answered your questions. So the agenda today is why clinical trials? What is clinical trials? What does it mean? Who is involved in clinical trials? And of course, comparison between clinical trials and natural history. So clinical trials has been around for some times, and it's been around even before it's known to be clinical trials or clinical research. Way back when when there's new collections of data and when we begin to realize that the data collections and comparison between the treatment arm versus untreatment arms are important to assess for these treatments. There's always clinical trials has always been there. But over time, it has been well regulated, it has been well measured, and standardized over times. So what clinical trial does for the patients and their family is that it provides access to cutting edge treatments. Now, clinical trials, the treatment and therapies that are used in clinical trials are not FDA approved or EMA approved, right? So they are novel therapies that unless you're in clinical trial, unless you're closely monitored in clinical trials, you will not be able to receive these because they are still under the classification of investigational product, right? So until it is widely available, commercially available to the general public, the only way you can get these kind of treatments and therapies is to be in clinical trial. And in the cases of patients with serious or rare conditions where they have exhausted the standard treatment options, this is the only way for them to get cutting edge treatments or newly innovative treatments. And within the clinical trials, there are, of course, close monitoring of the patient's overall health and progression. The physicians or the principal investigator have to follow strict guidelines and protocol. And with that, there would be frequent health checkups, expert medical cares, and potentially there will be benefit to the participant in the trial. And it's almost being in a clinical trial is an altruistic type of behavior, right? Because you are volunteering yourself, you're volunteering and risking your safety to see if the drug works, to see if it's safe. So you're also contributing to the general community and to the medical research that will help other patients in the future. And of course, alongside with that, you also support and improve scientific discovery and knowledge. And lastly is hope, right? So if a child or someone with a rare condition or with a condition of diagnosis, and they come to their physician and they say, okay, well, I have this diagnosis. I want to get treatment. For the most part, in the world that we live in rare disease space, um, there's roughly only 5% approved treatments for the rare disease community. So there's a great chance that if someone has a rare disease condition that was recently diagnosed, in all likelihood, there is no treatment available commercially for that patient, for that condition. So in clinical trials, is the only way that they would get cutting edge treatments, and with cutting edge treatments and innovative treatments, patients then will have hope that there is a light at the end of the tunnel. There's hope that they may benefit from the treatment that's provided to them. And so, what is clinical trial? So we discuss why we participate in clinical trials, but what is clinical trials? What does it mean? It is a research study, and what it does is it tests new treatments, and the new treatments are interventions in human research. So a drug discovered, and it's then tested in animals to see if it's safe, to see if it has any improvement in their clinical outcome. And once animal or preclinical data has been reviewed and it looks favorable, then it advances into clinical trial phase or human phase. And the purpose of going through that in a systematic order is to make sure that it is safe generally first. And then once you get into the human or the clinical phase, it's then broken down in multiple phases. So phase 1 is where the participants will receive the investigational product. And once they receive the investigational product, it is then to assess for, is it safe, right? So if a participant take the medication or take the investigational product, was there any side effects? Was it safe for them? And then alongside with that, they look at dosage range. So they start out with a lower dose and then slowly advancing it to a higher dose. And with that, along with the closely monitored lab, they can see how well the medication was metabolized or excreted outside of the system. So all of that is fairly important. So phase 1 is fairly important in determining, the key thing is it safe? Is it well tolerated? Once the phase 1 is completed, all of the data review, if the product is safe to be taken, if the product has safety profile that's tolerable, then it then moves to phase 2. Now, only about 70% of phase 1 study then move to phase 2, which is a really good number, but it's not 100%. In phase 2 of any clinical trials, it is primarily testing for efficacy and side effects, right? So in phase 2, okay, is it safe from phase 1? But then what are the side effects of this drug? What are the side effects of this therapy? And does it work, right? So can you see any signal? Can you see any signs of improvement in phase 2 of these patients? And in phase 2, the ratio, the odds of moving on to phase 3 is much lower. So it's about 30% of phase 2 clinical trials move to phase 3. And you have to advance at these stages or steps in order to receive the data and using that data to submit to FDA for approval. Phase 3 is primarily to confirm the effectiveness of the drug, alongside with still monitoring for side effects, still monitoring for safety effects. But is it safe? Is it safe for the patient to take? And does it work, right? So you can take tons of herbal supplements and it's relatively safe, but does it really work? And that's what phase 3 is for. So phase 3 has what they call endpoint measures or outcome measures. And so they give the medication to the patient or participant. they as in the study team, the research team. Then certain endpoints or outcome measures. So, for example, in Duchenne muscular dystrophy, some of the outcome measure include 6-minute walk test, 4-stair climb, North Star ambulatory assessments. So those are kind of functional or motor assessment to test and see if the participant has good strength or improved strength. Can they walk faster? And so those are those are measurements that is captured before the participant started on medication. And then, of course, at interval times subsequently after that. Now, the other outcome measure that is outside of functional assessment is surrogate biomarkers or muscle biopsy. So those are some of the outcome measures, still follow within the outcome measure, but it's a different form of measurement. And then, of course, if it looks well, then in all likelihood, in a rare disease space, for the most part, sponsor or pharmaceutical company can take data from phase 2 and 3 and submit to FDA for approval. And then phase 4 is to closely monitor how patient does after the drug is approved. So who is generally involved in clinical trials, right? So we know it's the participant, the patients, and their families. And behind the scene, there is pharmaceutical companies, which oftentimes are referred to as sponsors, right? So some of the sponsor for this program is Edgewise, Regeneron. Those are pharmaceutical companies that provide resources and provide the staff and personnel for the research site or research team to be able to conduct the clinical trial. Now, all of these clinical trials, especially in human, especially in our space, in our world, oftentimes it's in pediatric, are highly regulated. In the US, it's regulated by FDA, and in Europe, it's the EMA. So there's different bodies, regulatory bodies for different regions of the continents. And of course, last but not the least important is the research team. So if anyone who has been in clinical trials know who the research team are, they are made up of your physician, your research nurses, nurse practitioner, physician assistants, your pharmacist, your research coordinator, your physical therapist, your cardiologist. These are a number of team members that help to execute and carry out the protocol that's developed by sponsor and approved by regulatory agency, whether it be FDA or EMA. So they execute and carry out those procedures and what is outlined in the protocol. And so if you, as a patient or a family who participating in a clinical trial, the research team are the ones that you will be intimately working with. And you can see this is our research team. It has grown over the years, but this is one of the pictures that I could find. But there is a number of people involved behind the scene that you may not be able to fully see. But there, and that's only on the research team side. And you have a whole team in your pharmaceutical companies. You have a whole team in your regulatory agency. So all of this activities and what's done surrounding in clinical trials are relatively strict and rigor. So what are the steps in participating? Let's say if you said you want to participate in clinical trials, you want to advance science, you want to improve therapies for patients and yourself. Where do you start? What do you do, right? So the first thing is finding the suitable clinical trials for yourself. And that you can, for the most part, in our community, I find that our patients and our patients' families highly research, highly read, and highly involved. And they speak with their physicians, they speak with their community, and oftentimes for our site, most of the patients that come to us are by word of mouth or referred to us by another family or within the community. And so, you have to know your condition, you have to know your status, your diagnosis, and what are the criteria for a certain trial. One of the federally funded websites, it's called clinicaltrial.gov. And you go on there and there's a search bar, you put in your diagnosis, your location, and it'll pull up a list of clinical trials. And within that, you can see certain inclusion and exclusion criteria for these clinical trials, whether it be, are you male or female? What's your age? What is your genetic mutation, your condition status, prognosis, progressions. And then they also look at other things, other organ functions, such as what's your heart status, what's your lung status, what is your ambulatory status. So those are some of the criteria that we look at for specifically for Duchenne muscular dystrophy, as an example. But in other conditions, there's various inclusion and exclusion criteria. But it generally surrounds very similar pattern of what's your age, what's your sex, what's your genetic mutation, condition, what's your clinical progression. Because what they want to do is to identify a group of individuals who has similar clinical presentation, similar age, similar genetic mutation, and subject that group to treatment. And if there's any improvement in treatment, then they move on to subsequent phases. But those are kind of the general gist of it, is that you first talk to your doctor, talk to your community, talk to your supporting healthcare team to identify clinical trials that is suitable for you or for your child, for your family member. And then one last resource that is really powerful is the patient advocacy groups, right? So MDA has if you go on MDA website, as you can see in the graphic here, if you look under the tab of science and research, under for clinicians, clinical trial finder tool, if you click that, it says for clinicians, but it's relatively simple to use. You go on there, you put that, and it comes up with where's your location, what condition you have, and it kind of go down a triage tree, and with the information that you input into the system, they would be able to provide you with a list of, okay, so based on what you have provided, these are the studies that potentially could be available to you. So then, of course, you reach out to those sites, and if you're fortunate enough where that study is within your clinic, then of course it would be so much easier, and you can talk to the treating team. So once you identify the study, when you identify the location, you reach out to the site and you talk to either research coordinator or research assistant. Then what they would ask you to do is to allow for them to review your medical records and basic informations. And based on that, once they review the medical history with their research team, they can see is that what is the inclusion and exclusion criteria? Do you fit this inclusion and exclusion set of criteria? And that's what they call the pre-screening and eligibility check, right? Because they don't want to bring you in and continue to talk until unless these things are confirmed, right? So that's what they call pre-screening. So once they have confirmed and pre-screened and proven that you're eligible to be in this study potentially, they then bring you in for discussion of informed consent and discussion of study procedures and whatnot. So the informed consent process is rather important, and it's a detailed explanations or a packet, usually comes in a packet of written detailed explanations of what is the purpose of the study, what are the risks and benefits, right? So if it's first in human, what they can tell you is in animal models, this is what they saw. And then subsequently, what is the protocol? What is the treatment plan for if you were to be in this study, and the durations of it? And last but not least important is your right. You have the right to withdraw from any clinical trial at any given time. Clinical trials are operate on the basis of voluntarily. So that means that no one can coerce you, or you should not be coerced to be in this study. And you can withdraw anytime, any given time, without any repercussion. And of course, only sign the consent form if you agree voluntarily to participate in the study. And once a conformance is signed and you agree to be in this study, the screening and baseline tests, these are the tests to assess for what is your status before you receive the medication. That's why they call it baseline or screening. So those include physical examination, lab tests, imaging, echo, MRI, whatever it is needed to confirm this is your baseline before you receive drugs. All of that will be done during those visits. And then, of course, you enter the visit and continue on to the procedures and the steps of it. Now, what is the difference between clinical trials and natural history? So clinical trials provide the data set to inform treatment decisions, and it is required for regulatory approval, FDA or EMA. And clinical trials is testing specific hypothesis or therapy. Does this drug work? If it works, is it safe to take? And if it is safe, what dose does it need to be taken at? Natural history, on the other hand, is an longitudinal observational study in which there is no intervention, where they just monitor your progression over time. But natural history is equally important because it lays the groundwork for development of new treatments and understanding of disease progression, particularly those in rare diseases where there's little known about the disease, and identify the potential treatment targets. Natural history is often important in designing clinical trials. So it provides the baseline data. And sometimes, in some instances, natural history can be used as the placebo arm of the clinical trials. So it does save quite a bit of time and effort on both sponsor, the families, and clinical sites in conducting clinical trials. So these are common and distinguished features between clinical trial and natural history. So for clinical trials, yes, it is an interventional. Whether it's therapies or devices, it is interventional. You're giving a therapy. Whereas natural history is not. It is simply observational. The objective of clinical trials is to assess for safety, efficacy of a certain treatment. Whereas natural history is simply to understand the disease progression. And the design of clinical trials is rather strict and rigorous, where you have an untreated arm and then you have the treated arm. So subjects or participants are randomized into one arm or the other, and it's tightly controlled and regulated by the inclusion and exclusion criteria, so that they can closely monitor and see for themselves which if the medication works or not. And a lot of times the study is called double-blind placebo control, meaning that not even your physician is aware which arm you're in, just to eliminate any potential bias that could potentially occur. And of course, natural history design is an observational part. So participants in clinical trials are often selected because they want everyone in their group and their cohort to be as similar as possible, right? So there is a strict selections of criteria of inclusion and exclusion criteria in clinical trials. Whereas in natural history, there's broader inclusion. So they simply just want to see how people progress over time. And so the inclusion criteria for natural history is much, much broader. So one of the natural history study is in muscular dystrophy. And in this instance, there are a number of natural history that are available, depending on which population and how the data is collected. So there is one with the CDC called MD StarNet, which is population-based, where they look at different clinics. They see how patient progress over time and how everything, how the patient progress, and if what kind of therapy they're on, if they're on steroids or not, if they're in clinical trials or not. So they're simply, again, a observational study. So that's what CDC MD StarNet. There is another one called Synergy, and that is looking at Becker's muscular dystrophy primarily. And again, looking at natural history, looking at loss of ambulation, functionality of that. Now, MDA has started a registry or a natural history study, a collections of progressions of data points in various clinic visits. And what that's called, it's called the MOVER, which is is short for Neuromuscular Observational Research Data Hub. And they and this data hub collect data from patients in MDA Center across the country. And initially, it was started in 2013 to collect detailed clinical data from patients in both Duchenne muscular dystrophy and SMA. Since then, it has progressed to other conditions, including ALS, Becker, FSH, limb-girdle Pompe. I think those are the ones that I can remember. But I'm sure the list can continue on and on. But what it does, it utilizes a state-of-the-art technology platform, and it's the Mover Data Hub, where they collect multiple diseases in multiple locations across the country. And because patients oftentimes will attend the multidisciplinary clinics and an MDA clinic in various states and various locations, the care management team then collects those data, and they collect the functionality. They collect, organ functions like heart. How's the heart doing? How's the lungs doing? What are the motor functions? And all of that are collectively gathered and stored and analyzed and report over time. And this is very useful collections of data set, primarily to help and guide future clinical trials design, future clinical trials research, and identify where the unmet needs and how the clinical progressions of certain conditions have evolved over time. So from 2019 to 2022, the data is collected included 50 MDA care centers and almost 4,000 participants. Now, in those 4,000 participants, 43 of those had 3 or more encounters. So this means that it's each time you go to clinic and you have an encounter, that's captured within this data set. And roughly about 50% of those encounters were 5 months or less than previous encounter, which means that the data sets are highly reliable and frequent, so that you can monitor the progression, the longitudinal progressions of these patients over time. So on the top image, what you see are the sites that are actively enrolling participants. And I'm in Atlanta, Georgia, so we do have a center that is enrolling patients for this registry. And oftentimes, initially, the initial set is called Legacy, and then it then evolved and morphed into Mover. But you can see that these are the number of participants that are in this data set and various conditions like ALS, Duchenne's, SMA, Becker's, limb-girdle. So over time, you can see that the number of participations over since the inceptions of the data collections. And fortunately, we're able to capture quite a bit with the exceptions of ALS. ALS is rather highly aggressive, and the mortality rate of ALS is oftentimes much higher than all other conditions. So you can see that there is a number of participants that we could not collect any further data. Some of the examples of what is collected are demographics. So what is your, your females or male, the type of insurance, the race, the ethnicity. But these are just demographics, right? Other things that are collected are their functional assessments. So if you go to clinic and there is a 10-meter walk test, or if there's a 4-stair climb, or if there's a 6-minute walk test, or North Star ambulatory, and some other conditions like SMA, there may be Hammersmith. So all of those are captured within this data set, and hopefully over time, you can see the progressions and the trends and certain patterns of these conditions over time. So that's all I have for today. I wanted to leave some time for questions. This is my contact info. If there's any questions or it's something that pops up after you end this discussion or end this presentation, feel free to reach out, and I'm happy to answer any additional questions afterward.
Thank you so much, Dr. Phan, for your wonderful presentation that gives our audience a lot of information about clinical trials and natural history studies, and so generous of you to share your contact information so people can reach out to you directly if they're interested in doing that. That's so helpful. Thanks. We do have a few questions in the chat and some from registration as well, so we'll go ahead and get into that for about 15 minutes here. I am going to go ahead and start with a question from registration that was asked quite a few times. Why is there an age limit for most clinical trial studies? Typically, this seems to be 65. Is there a specific reason for that you could share with us?
Yes, of course. That's a great question. Identifying what criteria would fit for clinical trials oftentimes require a lot of research and background discussions amongst the patients, the patient advocacy groups, and regulatory agency, and depending on the condition, right? So for the adult population, they want to include as many participants as possible, but there is that cutoff age limit of 65. And the thought of it is that as one ages, there are other comorbid conditions that may obscure the safety profile or the treatment efficacy. So they had to do some kind of cutoff. But oftentimes, if a trial runs an adult population and the selection is up to 65 years of age, if that therapy is approved, in all likelihood, they will allow for patients older or in a different age range to receive the medication. So I think they have to restrict it in some sense to make sure that they have a consistent group of patients with similar presentations and clinical progression.
Yes, that absolutely makes sense. Thank you. And also good to note that just because a clinical trial caps at 65 doesn't necessarily mean that the ending treatment will cap at 65. So also good information there. Thank you. I do have a question from the chat as well. And you did talk a little bit about this in your presentation, but maybe there's a little bit you could add. How best does a natural history study impact clinical trials and population health?
Yeah, that's a great question. So natural history is wonderful, but it does take time. Um, it first starts with what condition you want to look at, and then what sort of informations or data you want to collect. And it's different in different conditions. And of course, the duration, right? So, ideally, if it were up to the the researcher, they would want to collect as many and as long as they need to, right? But um, it depends on conditions. Some conditions progress quicker than others. Some will progress slower. So depending on the condition, where the natural history could say, we'll monitor the patient for over a 3-year period of time or 6 years period of time. So it just depends. For conditions such as SMA type 1, where almost 100% will have mortality by 2 without any intervention for type 1, then your natural history is really much shorter than any other. So it depends on the condition. And how does it affect the general? Oh, I'm sorry. Well, the second
Um,
part of it was
the general population health.
the general population health. So this is for very condition specific, right? Um, so they just follow a set of conditions and not necessarily compare them. I mean, they do compare them to the normal healthy participants or healthy individuals, but um, it doesn't affect it directly. What it affects the clinical trial design and selections of endpoints and outcome measures. And it gives certain guidelines and trends on, well, for this group of individuals between this and this age, they progress much faster. So this is the time where if there's going to be any therapy that would help to improve their clinical outcome, this would be the period of time in the age group that you would want to monitor. So in a lot of clinical trials, especially in pediatric, they're very stringent on the age range of patients.
Great, thank you so much. Another question we received from registration: how, if any, are robotics supporting your work in clinical trials?
Technology has come a long way. We have now utilized, and I've seen this in clinical research and in neuromuscular, and I'm speaking from my experience in doing research in neuromuscular conditions such as Duchenne, SMA, Becker's, limb-girdle, FSHD. We now have technology to allow for us to measure patients' functional outcome without really having them putting much effort into it. And some of those are wearable devices, like you can wear them on your watch, you can wear them on your ankle. Some of them include video assessments of your of how you function, how you raise your arm, and how strong you are. And let me see what else. And then there is, in the video, you can do it at home, or there's a new technology that is developed that's called reachable workspace. So what is your functionality of your arms and how far can you reach? So the technology has come a long way. It's still, most of them have not gotten to the point of this is the primary outcome measure. A lot of the primary outcome measure currently is still functional assessment, still having the physical therapist working with the patient and asking the patient to exert certain strength and measure it over time. But it has come a long way. And I think it's going to be the way of the future is to measure it without the patient knowing that you're measuring it.
Oh, yes. Very interesting. All right. Well, thank you for that one. Let's get to it. We got a few more questions coming in through the chat, so we'll get to those. And I'm a little unsure of the phrasing on this question, but I think you'll understand. In trials that reached phase 3, how many overall have been approved?
The percentage is very little. The odds of getting a trial or getting a therapy approved, I think last I heard, is 1-digit percent, so less than 10%. I've conducted over 50 clinical trials now, and out of those, 5 got approval. So it's unfortunate, but it's the reality of clinical trials and clinical research. But yes, not that many. I wish there were more.
Yes, understandable. Thank you. So we had a question come in similar to the question about the age cap. What about the minimum age limit for some clinical trials? Can you speak to why there might be a minimum age limit? I'm sure it's along the same lines as the maximum age limit.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. There's so the maximum age and the minimum age. A lot of times, the minimum age is primarily based on the animal model, right? So if most of the animal models are either in mice or monkeys or dogs, or so those animals have equivalent human ages. And so if they test the drug on those animals at certain age, then that's the age limit that you can start in human, in equivalent in human. And you can't move on until you test younger animal, then you can lower your age limit. So it's simple. A lot of it is also based on animal models and on animal testings as well.
Okay, interesting. That makes sense. Thank you. So our next question, are the completed results visible on the clinical trial site the same as what's available to medical doctors and specialists, or are there more information, more options on the back end that patients or professionals might not be able to see?
Yeah, this is an ongoing question, and it comes up all the time. The data that is collected when a participant is in clinical trials are proprietary properties of sponsors of pharmaceutical company. And I, as an investigator for any clinical trials, can't give out those without the confirmations and approval of sponsor to allow to give it to the patient, to allow for me to give it to the patient. And it's simply a number of things, right? So one is for data integrity, because what they don't want is for one patient to compare their data to the next patient. And it could simply bias the overall outcome and how patients are being evaluated and how they function, right? So that's one. And then two is it's confidentiality. So if these data were given to patients, and collectively, if you have a good subset out there that's floating around, that could affect the sponsor status within their investors and other companies. So I think that's kind of their proprietary, and they hold on to it. But there has been instances, and because of patients' voices and the community pressure, where sponsor at the end of the study will give the individual patients, the results of their muscle biopsy, the results of their echo, MRI, but it's toward either the end of the study where the drug is approved, or at the end of the study where they say, oh, the drug doesn't work. So they don't want the data released to affect their approval status or to affect the status of the study, the ongoing of the study. Because, if data are given and they get dispersed within the community and everything looks horrible, nobody's going to want to be in the study, or vice versa. So I think they guard it fairly carefully. But there has been instances, but it's only typically once a drug is approved or the study is terminated.
Wonderful. Thank you. That was a really thorough answer and also answered a different question that was in the chat that came up. So thank you so much. Another question that we have in the chat, why can't I find a study of my condition in regards to gene silencing? I have OPMD and see only trials for swallow trials. And I don't know if you know specifically about that one, but maybe we can generalize this question a little bit more to discuss why some avenues of clinical trials are more easily accessible for researchers. If you could just speak to that a little bit.
Sure, I'll try my best. I hope I'll answer this appropriately to specifically to this question. There are roughly 7,000 rare disease out there, and only 5% of it roughly has approved therapy. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Now, when drug companies develop therapies and drugs, they want to so for you to show any drug to be effective, you have to have what we call endpoint or outcome measure, right? So what is it in any given condition that you give the drug, you can measure, oh, the drug is working or not. So in OPMD case, swallow seems to be the predominant symptoms, and that's why they're focusing on swallow. There are a number of gene therapies and gene silencing research that are ongoing. But it has to show great efficacy and great improvement and effectiveness in animal before that can translate into human research. So I don't know, and I'm sorry, I don't know much about the research that is ongoing in OPMD, but that's usually is the trend, is that a drug has to be identified, tested in animal models, shows that it works, it's safe before it translates into human. So that's kind of the general trends, and I can see why swallow trials are available in OPMD is simply because that's the measurable symptoms that you can do in OPMD, one of the measurable symptoms that you can do in OPMD.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that is really helpful to understand where some of these trials are coming from and why it's easier to access some avenues. Thank you. So I have a few more questions in the chat. If you notice that I skipped your question in the chat, please feel free to add it back in here at the end. I just want to give that so everyone who has a question is able to get that answered. Just a few more here. Is it true that the minimum age requirements no longer need to be met once a trial is approved?
Yes and no. There has been trial for example, there's been most recently Sarepta gene therapy study where this clinical trials was from age 4 to 7, and those data were submitted along with some of the data for the older age group. The initial approval only approved for 4 to 5 years of age. And so when Sarepta submit their second label expansion, my assumption was that the FDA would approve 6 to 7 as well. But it turned out the FDA said, no, it looks good. The safety profile looks good. We're going to approve it for all ages. So there is that possibility of approving beyond what robust data that was available. So I think it all depends on how the data looks and what the safety profile and efficacy of it. And that's what FDA look at when they approve. So they can expand the labeling or the indications for that condition. to just simply, well, you only did research for this age range, so we're only approving for this age range. Or they can just simply say, oh, well, it looks so good, it looks so great, it looks so safe, we're going to go ahead and open it up to everyone. So those are kind of the two possibilities that you can see.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Dr. Phan, for that great answer, for all of your great answers to our questions during the Q&A today, and for your time sharing with us all of the great information in this webinar. I do just want to make a quick note to everybody that we are going to have to stop our Q&A at this point. If you had questions coming in through the chat, I encourage you to reach out to either the MDA Resource Center or Dr. Phan, because she was so generous to provide us with her email address. So, and make sure that if you do have a question for Dr. Phan, that it is relevant to the clinical trials, especially as that is her expertise. Any other questions you can direct towards our resource center. But again, thank you so much, Dr. Phan, for your time and your expertise and sharing with us in our MDA community today. We sincerely appreciate you.
Thank you so much for all your patience and time spending with me today. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. MDA would again like to thank our program sponsors, Edgewise Therapeutics, Mitsubishi Tanabe Pharma America, and Regeneron Pharmaceuticals for partnering with us on today's webinar. This year marks MDA's 75th anniversary. This milestone has been made possible by generations of dedicated support from people living with neuromuscular disease. Their families, researchers, clinicians, volunteers, and donors who boldly drive our mission forward. As we look ahead, we remain committed to honoring this legacy, building on the impact we've made together, and continuing our momentum towards transformative progress for people living with neuromuscular disease. To learn more, visit mda75.org. Last but not least, we again invite you to join the MDA community. Joining is free and will help you stay up to date on our programs as well as on the latest research. Please scan the QR code with your smartphone or visit the link in the chat. We again would like to thank Dr. Phan for sharing her time and expertise with us today. Dr. Phan, if you could again just share your email with us in the chat, so if there's anyone who didn't get a question answered, they can perhaps get a hold of you. Thank you so much. And again, MDA community, we want to hear from you. What did you like about today's program? What can we do differently in the future? Please fill out the brief survey that will pop up right after the webinar. Your feedback is important to us. If you have any questions, are looking for support or resources, please contact MDA's Resource Center at 1-833-275-6321. Let me say that one more time, 1-833-275-6321, or via email at resourcecenter@mda.org. This does conclude our webinar today. Thank you so much to all of our participants and to Dr. Phan for sharing her time with us. I hope everyone has a wonderful evening, and we will see you again soon. Bye.